Um, so this is really about emerging conservation activities. I think when we started putting this together, there were good people in the New England area that sort of have national reputations about this stuff. Little did we know that we were going to get probably the three best in the country to talk to us about this morning. So I am really happy that we've managed to get Steve Small and Reg Hall and Jim Levitt as our speakers this morning. I'm not going to go into great detail with them because you have I would refer you to the bios that you can get online. But Steve is sort of renowned as a tax lawyer, but he's spread beyond that recently and gone on to thinking about the big picture and where we need to go. Reggie has been at the Conservation Foundation, among many other places, but for a while now he's been at Conservation Foundation, where he knows more about helping projects, particularly large and small, get financed both as a bridge matter and as a permanent matter. And then Jim Levitt has become an academic guru in the finance industry, not only in his role at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, but he's also, I think, still a honcho anyway at the International Land Conservation Network and Yale's Conservation Finance Network. So we have awfully good people to do this. We're going to let them talk in about the order that I just introduced them. We'd ask you to please use the chat button for questions you might have. Probably these are going to be relatively short presentations, so feel free to hold your questions if you would. We're going to get through them. After that, I can't imagine not having Jim and Reggie and Steve wanting, and myself, frankly, wanting to comment on the others' presentation. So we'll do that for a couple of minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions or comments. And there's some great people on this thing, so we will we'll open it up to comments as well. We'll try to keep the comments brief so everybody can talk, and the answers brief, folks, so we can pull that off. So we will begin in just a second. Oh, and finally, I got to thank Cynthia Henshaw, the unseen person on this screen, who's our official host for this, and it's her technical expertise that's got us going here. And by the by, as I step down in June 30th as president of the Mass Land Trust Coalition, Cynthia is going to step up. So congratulations to Cynthia for becoming the new head of MLTC. That lures me back into being, sort of on the board, longtime president of the Lincoln Land Conservation Trust, and still a member of the board of the trustees of reservations. But here, all I am is a moderator trying to keep these three guys under control. So I would start with, and none of us are young, you can notice on the screen. Those of us who've been in this field since, Steve likes to say 1984. I got to tell you that I was put on the board of the Lincoln Land Trust in 1978. But of course, that's an all volunteer land trust. So all I did was clear all the damn trails. But back then, there was a different way of financing land conservation. For the most part, it was people who really cared about their land coming out of the woodwork and wanting to save it. And there was a discussion of whether you save it in fee. And by then, before 1968 in Massachusetts, you couldn't do a conservation restriction, and we were the first to have conservation easements anywhere. So that spread out the opportunity of how to protect land, but financing it we always became difficult. So we started with charity, beginning back with the trustees and Mass Audubon in the 1890s. And it wasn't until the 70s when we started to get state funding, some of which came through the feds, but we would apply for state grants. And I think most of the people on this call are fairly familiar with the array of traditional Massachusetts state grants that are available. And we thank Melissa and Bob O'Connor and Joel Lerner and all. It's depending on how far back you want to go in making all that happen. But since then, it's gotten tough. There are many needs almost everything needs to be purchased in one form or another, bargain sales if you can pull it off. Federal and state grants are there, but they don't always work. And they certainly don't work with the delay that bureaucracies can bring. So there need to be a myriad new ways of making this stuff work, and maybe a whole new approach. So the goal of this discussion is going to be to show that there are many tools in the toolbox. I was going to use arrows in the quiver. I'm sorry. Many tools in Steve's toolbox, and we ought to keep an open mind about where they are, what they are, and how to reach them. And it isn't always easy to reach them. You probably need pros to help get some of them or to know about them. But we're trying our best to make sure that partners, either ourselves, our consultant partners, or our agency partners, know how to find these things. And to that end, that is what the Conservation Fund does. And it's what the rest of us muddle around the edges in. So on that note, I would like maybe Steve could take over, and then we'll run over to Reggie and Jim after that. So Steve, you're up.
Oh, good. Let's see. That part worked okay. So see if we can get rid of that over there. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Buzz. We'll go back to 1978. Was when I arrived at Chief Counsel's office at IRS in Washington, and there were 9 reg projects sitting on my desk. Whenever a new attorney arrives, they get rid of all the people in the division, dump their least favorite projects. And I had the excise tax on retreaded tires and grantor trust reporting, and I had section 178 of the tax code. And who would have known? And here we are today. And again, thank you all for showing up. 1 minute summary of what I have to say, and then I'll take a little bit longer, but still I hope stay within my allotted time. Since 1978 and then private practice in 82, that's 4 decades that I've been out there in the world doing this work. And about 6 or 8, and it's always been, and I never liked the use of this term until I found a way to use it. It's always been binary, this business. Either you sell a piece of land and it gets developed, or you protect it. And that's fine. And our business has thrived and been enormously successful for 3 to 4 decades with just those options: conservation easements and government funding. That's what's been available to us. And about 8 years ago, I talked to my friends in Virginia at C2I, who had to come up with a completely different way to protect land. And they were conservationists, and I was just blown away by it. And the message of today, and I'm going to share the C2I first deal with you, is we need a different mindset. We need a bigger toolbox. This was a book that I wrote in 2014, The Business of Open Space, What's Next? And I was envisioning something like what the C2I deal was. And I wanted land trusts and everybody, financial people and conservation people, to understand how important this new mindset is. And things really haven't gone in that direction, but things have gone much more in the direction we're going to talk about today. So the C2I thinking, and I'm just going to run through this transaction very quickly. They started with the Wetland Reserve Program, WRP, which essentially has 15 years of payments, write a check every month or 6 months or whatever it might be to the landowner. And there you go. And the landowner in return keeps the wetlands and the wildlife habitat intact, and that's fine. And then the C2I guy said, you know what, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna write the landowner a check, a signing bonus up front right now. And then after the WRP payments stop, we're gonna write the landowner a check every year for the next 25 years. So that gives the participating landowner a 14-year income a 40-year income stream. And what we get for all that money that we're paying the landowner is we and the landowner agree how to divide up the resources here, divide up then. And people say, don't call them resources. It's natural, it's environmental, it's ecological. For purposes of this program, let's call them resources, or assets of components of land ownership. And in that deal, as it originally envisioned, the landowner retained all the agricultural rights, retained all the recreational rights, retained whatever other minor rights were relevant to the landowner and the landowner's use of the property. And us, the investors, we got all the rest of the rights, whatever they were. And this is where we get past binary. Every single acre of land has all kinds of environmental, ecological, scientific characteristics. What we care about in the Northeast is maybe not necessarily the same thing that they care about in Arizona, and not necessarily the same thing they care about in Mississippi or in Washington State. But every acre of land has these valuable components associated with it. We buy all those rights. And then this was what got me, what I'd never thought about before. They disaggregate, we disaggregate all the rights that we have purchased and sell currently the rights for which a market currently exists. And in this case, in 2014, when they started with this, maybe even 2013, carbon credits were the only real monetizing situation that was available, and bank the remaining rights until a market develops for them. What does that mean? Water rights, habitat credits, green credits, urban garden credits. And I just thought that just absolutely knocked my socks off. And in fact, that was really what was behind my work on that first book, on that last book. Now, what I came to understand is everybody I talked to about the book and the idea loved it, but it never got any traction. And the reasons why it didn't seem to get any traction are beyond the scope of this program, because we're going to look in a different direction. But we are looking at a different mindset. Two significant tools need to be added to the current toolbox. Acre-based thinking, which is more or less how I would describe what the C2I program was, dividing up all the assets that are associated with the bundle of ownership, and dollar-based thinking. What new forms of creative financing can we put together to protect that acre or that forest land or that valley? And today's program, really with Reggie and Jim's participation and Buzz and me sort of bookending it, is on the dollar-based thinking. I still love the idea of acquiring all those rights and disaggregating them and selling them off in the marketplace, but I think we're still a ways from that. And so really, I think at this point, I can turn it over to whoever the next speaker is. Is that Reggie or Jim?
Reggie. That's me.
All right, one more point before you go. The other thing I like about both of these approaches, I'm being careful how I'm phrasing this. I've loved working with conservation easements and conservation restrictions. What has made that work so much more difficult today is the IRS has its nose in the tent now. But that only happens when you claim a federal income tax deduction. As I've always said, if the county says to Aunt Sally, we'll give you $500,000 for a conservation restriction on your farm, and it's worth $500,000, and she doesn't take a deduction, all of the 170H rules, the tax code rules, don't apply. In fact, if the taxpayers and Aunt Sally agree, the deed can say there will never be any more houses on this property, ever, period. And Sally can sign it and the town can sign it. And the idea of expanding and the toolbox that includes many, many, many more ways to protect land that don't involve a federal income tax deduction, it means the IRS doesn't care. I mean, as long as you, in theory, pay tax on the money that you receive. So I think there are a lot of possibilities here that can grow. Okay, next.
Okay. Well, thanks for the setup. Let's see if we can get this into, there we go. Presentation mode. Can everybody see that? Buzz and Steve and Jim?
You're
Yeah.
not in presentation mode yet.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see here.
Now we're seeing your slides,
Beautiful. Okay.
but
So
with the slides coming.
what's that?
Hit the end slideshow and then go back to the start because we're seeing the presenter mode.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe I will just do it. I can just do it this way,
Okay.
if that works. Don't want to take up time. Let me try one more time. How's that? Better? No?
I can see it. I don't know
Yeah.
if the others.
We good, Cynthia?
Yeah, it's fine. You're not in presentation mode, but that's fine. We can see your
Okay.
slides.
Okay, I'll just go with this. So I'm gonna, I guess, back up a little bit and use my time to first define what conservation finance is, and then talk just briefly about why, considerations to pursue it, quick self-assessment. Are you ready? Is your organization ready to pursue it? And then talk about the sources and some kind of ground rules for engagement and ideas for on-ramps to get into the space. So, first a quick definition: conservation finance. Folks can read this, but I do want to point out the distinction between funding and financing. There's this broad spectrum of conservation finance, and frequently sources like grants from agencies or foundations are lumped in there, and technically not really financing. That's more funding. And the way I distinguish the difference is funding usually stays in the ground, or you get to keep it and hold on to it and do something else with it, whereas financing is usually other people's money that you might be borrowing or have the use of to achieve your outcomes for a certain amount of time. And also want to highlight, frequently I think folks jump to the conclusion that conservation funding and finance is being used for acquisitions, but it's also for stewardship, and it can also be used for covering operations and generating unrestricted revenue. So I'll hit a couple of examples, but just wanted to kind of point those things out and lay the groundwork. So why look for financing and funding? First and foremost, leveraging limited resources, whether that's dollars, other people's time, or even internal expertise. And one thing I'll hit on later, but you don't have to have the capacity to do some of the, pursue some of these techniques. You just have to be somewhat knowledgeable about it and be aware that there are other folks out there already doing it. So you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can partner with them. And in particular, with the big like private funds, pooled, timber investment management organizations or private equity investment funds looking at farmland or something like that. Also, if you are using financing, there's some really compelling cases for fundraising along the lines. If you're borrowing money or using other people's money, interest rates are still really low, even though they just went up a smidge. So a good time to take advantage of that. Moving on, self-assessment. Again, this can be a resource for after the presentation when you have this, and you're reviewing it online or what have you. Really focused on, does your organization have a track record of actual, are you active? Are you doing real estate projects? And really number 9 there is pretty important. Do you have staff or a really dedicated volunteer that can serve as a point of contact? Because if you're going to be pursuing some of these techniques, your partner is going to need a point of contact and really, who's in charge, who are you, working with closely. So beginning to look at the spectrum of all sorts of different sources, right? Beginning to kind of tease out which ones fall into which buckets. generally speaking, from right to left, you have the easy ones going to the more difficult or advanced ones. And usually, again, generally speaking, that wedge at the bottom, there's more money towards the right of the screen, and bigger dollars. So, just we're not going to talk about all of these. We're just going to highlight some of them. But we can certainly, I'm happy to engage after this session if folks want to go down a rabbit hole on some of these. But another thing to think about, and again, thinking about starting with the easiest stuff first, getting your track record established, and looking for those on-ramps to engage in the space. I don't expect all, like an all volunteer organization to go out and do a new market tax credit type of project. That's probably not going to happen. That's probably not realistic. Or, two staffed organizations probably not going to create an impact bond of some sort and have a private placement offering and, have all sorts of investors from Wall Street coming to participate. So, being realistic about this stuff. So,
Reggie, before you go on, could you just, the slides are kind of short. Can you go to where the line is between the slides and the notes and just pull that bar down so that the slides could be a little bit bigger?
Yep. How's that?
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So, let's see, conservation finance, effort versus reward, complexity versus money available. And this is, just real quick, a couple of examples of what we're talking about here. So far left, pretty easy to do, a little bit of money involved, but crowdsourcing and working with local business partners. There are no shortage of organizations in New England, in Massachusetts, that have relationships with their local brewery or a local distillery or an outdoor gear retailer that does, a Saturday or two throughout the year where the shopping, benefits the local land trust, or a particular brew or beer or vodka or whiskey or whatever goes to benefit the local land trust. It's not going to generate $500 million. It's probably going to generate $5,000 to $10,000, maybe a little bit more. But, that could be unrestricted revenue that could cover operations or maybe some transaction costs for a particular project. Then moving up the spectrum, loans and program-related investments, which are loans from foundations, using debt, borrowing other people's money to fill in a time gap or a funding gap. Again, a lot of organizations are working in this space, utilizing loans from other entities, whether it's a conservation fund, the Norcross Wildlife Foundation. Some foundations are lending money, again, filling in time and funding gaps. Ecosystem services, that could be mitigation banking or what have you, having the land and maybe the conservation values pay for themselves, pay for their own conservation protection. Again, mitigation banking, this may be a good opportunity for organizations to partner with a for-profit mitigation banker. But there are also other things there. And I wanted to highlight New England Forestry Foundations. They have a pooled timber income fund, which is really fascinating program. But effectively, it's designed for private citizens to donate land and timber rights to NEF for management, and that pooling of and aggregating of perhaps smaller woodlots creates a revenue stream that kicks out 2 to 3% return to those landowners in perpetuity. But what's cool is that, as I understand, there are opportunities here for land trusts that own woodlands to enroll in the program potentially, not necessarily gift the land, but maybe the timber rights to NEF. NEF manages it, but it's generating a return to perhaps cover stewardship, maybe to cover trail maintenance or put in kiosks, or cover the annual monitoring and management of the resource and the public recreation. Again, moving up the spectrum, state water revolving funds. These are big dollars. These are effectively loan dollars. This is coming from the Environmental Protection Agency, focused on water quality and in some instances water quantity. Historically, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. Historically, these dollars have gone to municipalities and units of government to cover waste, the creation or improvement of wastewater treatment plants, drinking water supplies, so on and so forth. There is an emergence there of using those dollars to actually address non-point source pollution, and they could be used for conservation, acquisition of land or easements. We've seen these used by land trusts in other parts of the country where they partner with the municipality to buy an emerald necklace around the municipality to prevent flooding or groundwater. We, the Conservation Fund, borrowed $25 million in California in 2006, using these dollars to acquire 40,000 acres of forest land in Mendocino County. And the pitch there was our forest management practices were improving the water quality of the streams where the salmon were swimming. So that was the first project of its kind in the country, using the state water revolving funds for land conservation. And then finally, moving out the spectrum, you've got state and local ballot measures, town, county, what have you. Again, not expecting your average local land trust to do this on their own, engage with partners. Our friends at Trust for Public Land are masters at this with their public finance program. But anyway, so just continuing on, our resources, really the clearinghouse for this space is the Conservation Finance Network. They have all sorts of resources, whether it's books, trainings, toolkits. Check out their website, have a rummage, a little bit of advertising. We're talking here for an hour and 15 minutes. They put on a week-long course, deep dive into all these topics. It's coming up in June this year in person out at Colorado State University. Highly recommended if you have that on your radar screen. But anyway, I don't know, Cynthia, are there any questions that have come through in the chat? Do we want to hit those, or should I turn it over to Jim?
No questions just yet.
Reggie,
Okay.
I have one very quick observation about one of the things you said.
Sure.
When you were talking about donating timber rights to NAF or some other organization, very important, and I did not want to bring the IRS into this discussion. People understand that a gift of timber rights, a gift of water rights, a gift of mineral rights is not deductible. It's a gift of a partial interest. And I can tell you the IRS has spent a lot of time on this. In Colorado, water rights are a separate property interest under Colorado state law. And they spent a lot of time trying to get the IRS to say, okay, in Colorado, at least, that's a deductible gift because it's not a partial interest. But the IRS wouldn't say that. So one of the things we might be thinking about in the future is amending the tax code to allow certain other partial interest gifts for conservation purposes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
Ray, we
hey,
see
Buzz,
your hand.
before we
We'll
move on,
deal
I
with
know
it
Ray has his hand up. I'm guessing he wants to, no?
No, let's wait till the end of this. Let's roll these through. Ray, hold
Okay,
on. You
sounds
hold
good.
on to your question.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think it's mine. It's 9:30. I'll try to do this in 10 minutes or so. And basically what my role in here to do is to tell you that this is not only happening in the United States. I am, Buzz, still the director of the International Land Conservation Network, which is a program of the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. I will be for another couple of years, and it's tremendously exciting work. We are working on 6 continents with regional representatives, and we're focused on conservation finance, on policy, stewardship. It's an incredibly diverse and highly motivated group. And that's really what I'm going to spend some time talking to you all about today. Steve and Reggie have given you invaluable information about what you can do in Massachusetts, but you should know that you're hooked in to land trusts around the world in more than 100 nations. And there are at least 6,000 or 7,000 practitioners who regularly participate in ILCN webinars and global congresses from Kenya, from Finland, from Chile, from China. And they look to Massachusetts for inspiration because we are the place where the first regional land trust in the world was invented. The Trustees of the Reservations is the first regional land trust in the world, as far as I know. And so we continue to innovate. We continue to have lots of expertise in New England, let me say, and you should be very proud of that. So I'm going to speak about a study that the ILCN just did called From the Ground Up, which is how land trusts and conservancies, not only in New England, but around the world, are providing solutions to climate change. And every one of the 10 cases in this study had to be financed. And a couple of them benefited from conservation easements or philanthropy. There are many other sources of finance for things like water funds that are common not only in Portland, Maine, but in Bogota, Colombia, and Cape Town, South Africa. Working with breweries is one that was mentioned before. There are all kinds of taxes on water users. There's a myriad of stuff going on, and we're doing our best to cover the landscape in 30 minutes. But let me tell you that we're just skimming the surface, and there are experts from South Africa to Melbourne, Australia, who would love to dig in more with this community of practice. So just a very brief introduction to the ILCN. Essentially, what we're seeking to do is improve the quality of life through the effective taxation, use, and stewardship of land at the Lincoln Institute. And then down at the level of the ILCN, we aim to be a highly effective, trusted, and connected global network, not just a Massachusetts network, and leverage expertise to successfully advance private and civic land conservation, literally on every continent, including now Antarctica. Let's see, next. This is one way we're doing it through this publication, which you can get on the ILCN website or from the Lincoln Institute website, which I will show you at the end of this presentation. But you're looking at a field here that is out in the middle of the state of Kansas. And so even in places as contrasting to Massachusetts as Kansas, there's all kinds of conservation finance innovation going on. Now, this community of practice that I'm telling you about, this is a picture of part of the people who attended a 2017 conference in Santiago, Chile. You can see right in the middle of the picture right there, there's Andrew Bowman, president of the LTA. I think I'm up here somewhere, but the people that, again, are interested in all the stuff that you all are talking about are coming from all over the world. This guy, if you can see my little arrow here, is Tilman Disselhoff at the top of the screen, who is an expert in this subject from Germany and heads Eurosite, which is the European Land Conservation Network, present in 27 countries across Europe, who are studying land conservation financing techniques of a wide variety. Again, here's Andrew Bowman in the middle. To his, on the screen, on the left of him is Tong Jin, who is the Nature Conservancy chief scientist in Beijing, China. Jeff Westcott below her, who is an academic expert in the field in Melbourne, Australia. Below him to the left is Karagu Mwangi, who grew up in Kenya, now works out of Cambridge, England, but is our African representative for the ILCN. And here's Cecilia Mahang to the lower left of the screen, who is our representative in Belize. So again, going from Norman's Woe to Barney's Joy is a possibility in Massachusetts, going from the South Korean peninsula to Brazil is something that we can do with this community practice. Next. And of course, within this community of practice that's practicing conservation finance, particularly Steve Small, of the kind that you were talking about, of it not only denominated in dollars, but in rand and in Chilean currency and so on, are land conservation organizations, not just called land trusts, but certainly called land trusts and other things from all over the place. And you see a couple of them. This one here, the Fundació Catalunya La Pedrera, is in Barcelona, Spain. They're hosting us at a meeting in May. Tide up here on your left is from Belize. Of course, there's the LTA, Tierra Austral in Chile, and I think Barong is in Indonesia, for example. And they are all using both funding, as Reggie was talking about, and innovative finance techniques to grow projects small and large. Let me give you an example in the United States and one outside the United States. The Neighbor Space Baltimore, which is profiled both in the from the ground up study and a case study that backs that up, is getting funds from Baltimore County to put in vest pocket parks in suburban Baltimore, which takes stormwater out of the off of the streets of Baltimore County, preventing that water from going into the basements of residents in that area and bringing oil and all kinds of residue there. So they're getting funding from a government source as well as philanthropic backing to get these tiny, tiny little parks put into Baltimore that make a huge difference to people's quality of life. In contrast, in Germany, NABU, which is the translates to the Nature and Biodiversity Union of Germany, is just put together a 56-mile-long conservation corridor along a river called the Havel River outside of Berlin. They are the leading land conservation organization in Germany. And they had to find all kinds of funding from the federal government, from the state, from local authorities, as well as all kinds of donations to get this project done over 15 years. So again, you go from very small to very large, and they're all significant in terms of biodiversity conservation, water quality, and the quality of human life. This is yet another project called Sight Wind Right that the Nature Conservancy is using to direct the funding of renewable energy developers in the central United States towards sites that don't interfere with biodiversity. So you've got kind of this mirror image of funding that's going to the right places, those white spaces on this map, where there isn't a migration pattern for cranes or black-footed ferrets or whatever, but there is excellent wind resource that can generate power that we desperately need in the United States, because depending on natural gas, as we have seen in our daily news feed from Europe, is a dangerous, dangerous thing to do. Again, all of you can pat yourself on the back. You're part of this community that's leveraging funding in the United States to protect over the course of the life of the Land Trust Alliance, which I think is reaching its 40th birthday sometime next month. Or the birthday was actually in February, but they're celebrating it next month, to protect 61 million acres of land. That's almost as large as the state of Oregon. That is a tremendous accomplishment for voluntary land conservation organizations in a very short period of time, less than a human lifetime. And again, those techniques that we're using here are being used directly in Chile by the Fundación Tierra Austral to protect land in a place called El Boldo, which is a superbly beautiful site right on the Pacific Ocean that protects both biodiversity and all kind of recreational trails in a place called Zapallar that I hope all of you can visit. So I invite you to join our larger network at landconservationnetwork.org, or at least get access to all these publications. There are case studies on everything I just talked about that are or will shortly be available on this website. Or if you want to look at our report, just Google Lincoln Institute and From the Ground Up, and it'll be sent to you for free. So that's my pitch. Conservation finance innovation may have its oldest roots in Massachusetts, but those roots, or roots as we would say in the Midwest where I grew up, are literally spread all over the world. Thanks.
Before we move on.
Hold on just a second. Yeah, you'll get the first shot, Steve. I got that. But I want to thank everybody first, if you don't mind. So I would like to thank everybody first. I think picking up on Jim's last analogy, the roots may be in Massachusetts, but it's less an analogy of a tree growing from those roots than it is sort of the mycelium through the root system of everywhere else. So because other species have gone and we've gone many, many really good ways to go. So what I'd like to do now is really take a few minutes. We have a couple of questions, but take a few minutes to talk among ourselves. And Steve, as is occasionally the case, gets the first shot.
Thank you, Buzz. Well, actually, all right. I think the message that I would like people to take away from this session, and I stated it earlier, is we need a bigger toolbox. We need a creative mindset. We need to stop thinking about development or conservation easements. This is happening. It's happening in little bits and pieces around the country. However, and some land trusts are certainly involved and are doing some of these deals. However, not enough members of the land trust community know about this resource that's available to them. People like Jim and people like Reggie and the publications that they've cited. I sort of liken this to where the land trust business was in the mid-'80s. Somebody was doing a creative deal in Montana and people in Memphis had never heard of it. And I think communication of this next level of conservation steps among the land trust community is hugely important. I'm very, very interested in that myself. And that was one of the reasons that I thought this would be a valuable program for this Massachusetts and land trust group.
Is true. I'm taking out, I'll pick up, I really do appreciate everybody's thought. I hope we're getting some creative thoughts out there. I think that at the lower level, there are some things we've done in Massachusetts since the early 70s anyway, that I've been involved in for a while of what we now call conservation subdivisions, or OSRD, where good planning can generate open space, and nonprofits like land trusts can play an incredible role in both advocating for them and holding them. That's low cost, except you have to find the funds to endow the stewardship, and increasingly that's being acceptable. For example, in Community Preservation Act deals, the CPA now recognizes that it is appropriate in the financing to have funds necessary for the holder when a municipal acquisition of land for the holder of the CR to have money, be paid money to provide stewardship of it. So I don't want to miss that. The other thing that we've used sort of unstated in Massachusetts for a while, and we esoterically, sort of theoretically, we talk about it, is getting paid for a few of those bundles of rights that to which Steve was alluding. Protecting watershed lands. People have been paid to protect the watershed lands, both donations that have been paid, or water companies actually buying the land and allowing some uses back. For watershed, stormwater is a good one. we talked about one of it. I would point out that in addition to Baltimore, Washington on a much more grand scale has a plan that is really reducing their stormwater runoff by something like 40%, simply by converting some developed lands into undeveloped lands and letting it be stormwater management. That creates usable open space for people, and finding ways to do that is really important. But I do also think that the partial, and then the regulatory. So we didn't talk today, I think Reggie alluded to, but we might have missed it, the idea of what I call regulatory protections, whereas mitigation for something not in New England so much as in the Midwest, in the mid-Atlantic states and elsewhere, mitigation funds are used. That is, somebody is going to fill wetlands, and instead of doing wetlands replication like we have in Massachusetts, which has to be basically on site, you do replications by helping protect a larger wetland someplace else. That kind of mitigation fund can occur. And then the final one that I think we missed, trying to play shortstop here, is the idea of the Build Back Better. In Massachusetts is using a lot of them. There are huge amounts of money, tens of billions of dollars in it. In Massachusetts, a lot of it hasn't all been allocated yet, but a lot of it's going to go to municipal vulnerability programs, the so-called MVP programs, which among other things can be used to acquire land. They have to have some other value, but now finally, climate is part of that. So I'm going to let Jim comment, but I also want him to comment on the extent to which internationally other countries are paying for, and I recognize these are mostly federal funding activities, but are paying for climate mitigation, paying to have better agriculture or or better forestry or funneling development in certain areas. But your comment goes first.
Okay, I'm really interested in your second question, but there's a question in the chat from Diana Young asking about whether or not, in addition to funding for some projects like Baltimore open space, they can use financing techniques as well, the distinction that Reggie made before. And the answer to that is absolutely there. I'll give you one example. There is a very ambitious and difficult to fund tree planting program in Cleveland, Ohio, that's been going on for 8 or 10 years now and is just picking up steam. Yes, they get funding from the local governments, city of Cleveland, from the county government, from the state government, from the federal government, but they also are very much depending on the involvement of the Western Reserve Land Conservancy and all these other volunteer organizations that are donating money and personnel and volunteer time to reverse a really alarming trend in that city, which is the disappearance of urban tree cover. So these are happening all over the country now. I think that the White House is beginning to pay attention to the need for those urban projects as well as the non-metropolitan projects. And they also blend those two forms of financing. Now, Buzz, with regard to your question, I was actually in a session yesterday with the head of the nature unit of the European Commission, which is the professional organization that runs the EU, the European Union. And he was very clear that the EU is putting lots of money into land conservation, and they see that as directly complementing the massive amounts of money that the EU is putting into climate change mitigation strategies and climate change adaptation strategies. The way that I would express it is that these two, climate change and land conservation, are braided together so tightly it would be almost impossible to pick apart the rope. That absolutely governments and actually multinational organizations like the EU are investing a huge amount of money in that. And I don't want to be shy about this. This is directly related, at least in my opinion, to the conflict that is going on in the Ukraine. We are basically engaged in a conflict over natural gas and oil, because that is what's funding our opponent's war machine. And anything that we can do to invest in nature, to buy electric cars that reduce oil consumption in this country so that we can share it with people who are under huge amounts of stress in Europe, to buy heat pumps so that we can save natural gas, again, to share in an emergency situation with our NATO allies in Europe, and to be very careful not to waste grain by throwing away food or eating foods that are grain intensive. All of these things make a huge difference, and it's not just because we love nature and want to see biodiversity thrive, although that's a completely valid and very important reason to do so. It's for our food security, it's for our energy security, it's for our it's for the future of life on Earth. So what we're doing today is certainly of urgent concern to NATO and to the EU. And I don't know how I could say it any stronger than that.
I wish it were more of a concern to the United States, but I'm bringing it back to Massachusetts. We really do have this issue of Massachusetts as focused so much on offshore wind and PV and electrifying mass transit and electric vehicles, that we're having a very hard time in the legislature getting a real foothold in nature services. And the Nature Conservancy has done a great job in trying, and Mass Audubon and the trustees have done a great job advocating. But we need to go further, and it sounds like Europe is doing much better. I'd like to let Reggie go and do his talk a little bit about the quantified ventures, asking whether there's a revenue source and there's something into that, and maybe at the same time, Reg, commenting on impact investing, and is that a place where smaller land trusts or some of us ought to be looking for the equity part of a deal. And then I want to go to Steve, both because he wants to speak and to answer Ray's comment in the chat about how the pooled investment fund can be a bargain sale. So Reg, you're up.
Okay, well, I'll talk until lunch, and then Steve can take over and cover until dinner.
5 minutes.
So Diana, to address your question, yes, urban groups are using finance all the time. And let's, backing it up and distilling it down, when you're using finance and other people's money, you have to figure out and keep in mind, A, they usually want a return, or you have to pay interest on a loan, and B, how do you get out from that financing? How do you repay them? What are the usually there's a blend of grants or some payment there down the road. So the loan program that I run, we've done a ton of financing to urban-based groups, not just land trusts, to build out pocket parks or to put in install green infrastructure on publicly owned lands, sometimes even privately owned lands. We financed a smart rainwater cistern pilot project in Los Angeles, where 6 different types of cisterns were installed in people's backyards. They're hooked up to the Wi-Fi and the cellular network. They're pulling data from the National Weather Service and autonomously adjusting their levels to accommodate rainfall events 48 hours out. But usually those programs are, the urban work and the trail construction and the park building. Usually those are, we're bridging reimbursement style grants, where you get $1 million from an agency to put in the rail trail or put in the jungle gym or whatever it is. And, you just got to bridge that funding gap. You might not have all the liquidity you need to churn through the reimbursement grant quick enough. What's cool about the quantified ventures example, they're really pioneering this concept of pay for success. And in this instance, in Washington, D.C., it's publicly owned land, it's church parking lots, it's other kinds of these remnant pieces, but effectively, in DC, it's a what is it? Unified sewer system. So it rains more than 1/4 of an inch in Washington DC, the sewer system gets overrun, and everything goes into the Potomac River or the Anacostia River, and it's pretty awful. And so to kind of anticipate and try and mitigate those impacts, they certainly are building the new system. I think it's done, but agencies bring in a group like Quantified Ventures, and they say, help us achieve this outcome. It could be the stormwater credit. It could be a mountain biking trail system in southeastern Ohio with the Wayne National Forest. Who knows? But agencies bring in a group like Quantified Ventures, help us achieve this desired outcome. Quantified Ventures brings in and amasses private investors, so private money coming to make things happen faster than an agency could make it happen. And the return is based on the level of future performance, i.e., so many gallons of stormwater are contained and mitigated and they don't go in the system, then that's a certain level of return for the private investors. If the private work kind of fails, and maybe they're not getting as much of a return, or maybe they're net zero on their investment, maybe they even lose money, but usually these things are successful. So that's kind of the concept, and it's a really cool model. And I'm 3 minutes, I've just summarized something that usually takes 2 or 3 hours to dive into. But for those types of examples, reach out to the Quantified Ventures folks. They're great to work with. Find them on the internet, and there are all sorts of case studies on the Conservation Finance Network's website about this stuff.
Well, I'd say also make sure you can also call Reggie, and that's what he does for a living.
Sure, call me.
And he can help out. So I would say that the keynote of what I think he just said was, for a long time, getting loans with bridge loans before government financing could be brought to bear. We've all done for a long time. This is a different story. This is actually financing which is paid back either in performance bond or over time. And a good example in New England that's gotten a lot of press and a couple technical write-ups is the Portland water system and their protection of land around Sebago Lake, which includes funding on an ongoing basis because of the water quality coming out of the watershed for the town of Portland. Moving over to Steve, both for what he wanted to say.
Hold on,
Ian,
hey Buzz, you didn't. I didn't hit on impact investors.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead first, and then
and I also want to acknowledge Kate's question in the chat, and somebody else wanted to know. I'll try. If we don't get to it, give me a call. I'll try and quickly address it in the chat after I'm done talking. But impact investors, these are, you think about the spectrum of giving or investing money. You've got philanthropy, foundations and individuals give you money. It's effectively a negative net to them. They're giving you their $50 or whatever, so they're out $50. Then impact invest, and then you've got like banks and traditional like Wall Street investments that are looking for a 12% return, and they're over on the far end of the spectrum. And impact investors are effectively looking for a return, but also trying to do good with their money. So they're not investing in petroleum or energy extraction. And there's a growing body of folks that are interested in investing in conservation. And there are private equity groups, there are timber investment management organizations, like Lime Timber or Conservation Forestry or what have you. And like in the farmland space in New England, great group to work with if you've got farmland that needs conserving, a group like Dirt Capital, where they effectively buy the farmland, work on transitioning the farm to the next generation farmer, and then work with the local land trust for the conservation outcome of a easement sale or donation or what have you. And then there are also aggregators like groups and consultancies like a group out of Santa Barbara called Legacy Works Group, where they work with land trusts. The land trust has a project that needs funding, it needs financing, and groups will work with the land trust to put together the vehicle, whatever it might look like, an LLC or some investment vehicle, to aggregate supporters of the land trust. There, you know, if you have a $2 million project, maybe it's 4 individuals at $500,000 each, and they put their money into the pool, and then they make the loan or help the land trust finance whatever the outcome, you know, whatever it is. They generate a modest, maybe concessionary level rate of return, 2 or 3% to the investors. But you know, there are all sorts of different things. Again, a really rich topic. I've taught sessions about this at Rally, you know, 90-minute sessions. So
Can I say a word? Can I say just
Sure,
one
Jim,
word?
go ahead, and then we're going to go to Steve to answer
Go to
Ray.
Steve. But I want to bring up a point that Steve made earlier. A lot of the things that Reggie is talking about now are on a whole different time scale than where we started from. That is, conservation easements still give you a one-time tax benefit, and then you're supposed to do something in perpetuity, right? And okay, that's a good deal for the person who's getting all the upfront payment, and it's a good deal for society because you're getting something from now until the end of time or something approximating that. Okay. The deals that Reggie's talking about with Quantified Ventures and other firms are saying, I will pay you this year for services that you provide this year. And then next year, let's try it again and try it the year after that. So it's much more based on your success, based on your performance, and it's short term. So you got to be in this business for the long term if you really want to make a return on your investment.
That's a great seg. Buzz, was Ray's question whether you could combine pool timber income and a bargain sale, something like that?
No, far worse than that. What he said was PTIF gifts, even though a partial interest, are tax deductible. He found a revenue ruling that declares this. Steve doesn't know that yet. This is probably an out of beyond this session, but I wondered whether you had any immediate thoughts on that. And I presume it has to do with the investment aspect of it, not an interest in land for which you have to give everything a qualified conservation interest or more. So quick thoughts on that, and then we'll.
Yeah, the shortest quick thought is I'm not sure I understand that authority that Ray was citing. So Ray, send me that. But let me make this observation about money and bargain sale deductions. Okay, if I sell an asset to charity and they pay me less than it's worth, I can take an income tax deduction for the spread. However, that's only if there's an allowable income tax deduction for a gift of that asset in the first place. And the best example I can think of is in the 80s and early 90s, many states still had 30-year conservation restrictions. There was state funding for a 30-year conservation restriction. And many of the people involved then were telling landowners, and you can take a tax deduction for the money that you give up, the value that you give up. And you couldn't, because you could take a tax deduction if it is a perpetual conservation easement that you sell at a bargain. But if it's a 30-year conservation easement, that doesn't qualify in the first place. And so, again, you know, what this has gotten me thinking about is tax code situations, which talk about longer term, where we can provide some additional benefits in the tax code for some of these, what the code views as partial interest at this point. I also absolutely second what Jim said earlier. It's just, I'm surprised that the land trust community doesn't seem to be pushing enough the link between land protection and climate change. I mean, you know, there's always oh, by the way, you know, here's a story about climate change, but it's just seems so fundamental to me. But we're entering a new era. You know, things are changing. So good. Things are changing for the better. At least some things are.
Yeah, Steve, I would counter that though, on the climate change thing. I think part of the challenge is being mindful of the fact that, you know, not everybody's based in what I would argue is liberal leaning educated New England, right, that understands climate change. If you're in a land trust in, let's say, Nebraska or Iowa,
Right.
or one of the quote flyover states that leans a little more conservative, climate change is a 4-letter word or a communist plot, depending on who you talk to. So, I think it's, as we think about the implementation of conservation, climate change is an outcome, but organizations may elect to use working lands conservation as the Trojan horse to achieve the climate change outcomes. And in some ways, using, let's say, grassland carbon or soil carbon funding or financing could be one tool to achieve that working landscape conservation. And there's some really cool examples of that out there.
And that just goes back to what I said earlier, that what's important in Maine is not the same thing as what's important in Arizona. And the beauty of all of this is that it is local. And if you come up with an interesting idea for a deal, do it.
Well, and then make sure other people know about it. Jim.
Yes.
I was born in Omaha, Nebraska, and I grew up in Kansas City. So I'm very familiar, Reggie, with the states that you're talking about. I'll be there this spring. I just want to bring in one other financial market issue that's going to make it relevant to everybody. The SEC is currently considering regulations that will make every public company in the United States, or any public company that wants to be listed on stock exchanges in the United States, to list in detail the climate change impact of their operations and of the products which they sell into the market. So if you're a meat packer in Omaha and you want to continue to sell your stock on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or whatever it is, you're going to have to report in detail in your annual meeting and in your annual reports exactly what that impact is. That, if that rule goes through and is upheld, which we don't know yet until it happens, then the attention on those details, whether or not you think it's politically correct to say the words climate change, is going to be intense. And the attention of large corporates in the United States, God bless them, on mitigating climate change and on addressing the adaptation issues is going to be intense. So all of a sudden, they're going to be looking at their local land trusts as potential partners in getting this job done. So I think that the era, it is possible, it is not certain, it is possible that going forward, if those new regulations become law or become part of the code, that there will not be any jurisdictions in the United States where you can't pay attention to those issues.
So it's really of interest. The SEC regs are notable not only because publicly listed corporations have to account for what the impact of climate change will be on their operations, which is traditional SEC. You got to say what your risks are, but it also is asking the corporations to talk about what their contributions to climate change are, how their operations, including their vendors' operations. So Jim's Omaha meat packer really has to deal with the people who, with the idea that the cattle growing throughout the Midwestern part of the country has a climate impact, and they have to account for that. So it's very interesting. It's a great way to do things. I would note that the private equity market may be moving faster than the public market. Blackstone has, for the last couple of years, been very clear that its investments are paying attention to climate change and what their investors can do to mitigate, but also, of course, what the impact
Larry
is.
Fink runs Blackstone, has a conservation easement on his property in North Salem, New York.
Well, yeah, I can think of several multi-quadzillionaires who have easements on their playgrounds in Montana. But and it's good to do, but I think those are mostly tax-based. Jim,
and I just want to say,
way, let me just interrupt a second. We got about 4 minutes, so I don't want to lose everything here. And then I want everybody to get a final say. But Jim.
the private sector are going to be our allies in this set of efforts. So, you know, for people who say, you know, I don't have an interest in working with that particular segment of society, please don't overlook the opportunities, because they are going to be tremendous.
30 seconds. Don't rely on government regulation. One of the things that has blown us away in the conservation easement field is as the IRS goes after syndicated conservation easements, their lawyers, the lawyers for the parties that put these deals together, biggest law firms in the country, making a fortune litigating, slowing down the process. So while I'd love to see more government help in this field, I'm really looking to the private sector and private money, exactly what you're talking about and what you've been doing to get us to the next level.
I think that's very true. Let's go around. I don't see anything else in the chat. And I'm gonna let Ray and the Pool Timber Investment Fund discussion go on with Steve, although I'm sure the rest, the four of us anyway, are going to be interested in how that plays out. I would let people go around maybe in the order that we started with for sort of final words, and I get the final word. But thank you, Steve. You just said one. Do you have more to say other than thank yous?
Yes, the single message that I like to deliver for today is we need a more creative mindset. It's starting. And people in the land trust community who have access to landowners need to start thinking beyond conservation easements and government funding and looking at private financing opportunities or public financing opportunities, but bring in hundreds of millions of dollars from the private sector with an acceptable rate of return for those investors to help us save land.
Great. Reggie?
I'd say it's a rich topic. We've provided a cursory overview. If anybody, any participants want to go deeper or learn more or get paired up with an organization that's already doing this type of thing, give me a call or shoot me an email. I put it in the chat. I'm happy to be the honeybee or Johnny Appleseed and pollinate and share ideas. So don't be shy.
Jim.
Talking about conservation finance as a rich topic is a great double entendre. But I just want to say that we are living in a very historic period right now. And I urge everybody not to overlook the opportunities we have to work across sectors, across the public and the private and the nonprofit and the academic sector and indigenous communities to get done the jobs that we need to get done.
So my final one, other than to thank the three of you and everybody else who was on the line, is that everything that was just said is the intent of this organization, along with having all of you think broadly about how to do things. The idea here was to lay out very superficially, in many ways, a whole panoply of things that can go on. And you know, and a lot of those were created around kitchen table discussions at various times, maybe big kitchen tables in some cases. But great ideas come from folks that are dealing with issues like this. So the public activities, public financing, private financing, cooperation with others, and talking to each other, I think is what this is all about. So unless somebody says something and I don't see anything, there are some good references, some good links that are in the chat. I will leave this open for a little while so you can copy them. And I remind you all that this has been recorded, both the recording and the and all of the presentations, which were really spectacular. Thank you guys. Are available will be available in about a week. And I sort of, when we were pulling this together, we thought about this, but I will comment on it now. You know, 4 old white guys. If you want to find old experienced people in land conservation, for the most part, we're all old and white, and most of us are, and some of us are guys. There's some women, but we also need to spread this out. We need to recruit people. We are recruiting people. We need to successfully recruit people. And part of that will also come by working urban, rural, suburban, by working across with all those partnerships and vertically through sectors. So that's also part of what we're all here to do. So on that note, I'll thank Cynthia one last time and let her get rid of us somehow. That's been fun.